Hey everyone, Prince Davslot here, and today I'm going to be talking about the free scenario in the Need to Know guide for Delta Green, Last Things Last. This is often, correctly in my opinion, recommended as the perfect starter scenario to teach both yourself and your players about Delta Green. I think this scenario has a great tone and really sets up an intriguing future campaign for you and your agents. This video is going to be split into three parts. First, I'm going to do a quick introduction to Delta Green. If you're new and coming to the system or want to just hear the sales pitch, I'll give it to you. The second one will be going through the adventure step by step and everything you should consider prior to running the adventure. And then the third part is going to be where to go after. You've played Last Things Last, your group liked it. Where do you go next, and how do you build a full Delta Green campaign that your players and yourself will enjoy doing? All the timestamps for these sections will be below in the description. And without too much further ado, we're going to be going right into the sales pitch of Delta Green. And hey, if you like this video and it helps you out, hit me with that like and subscribe. A like a day keeps the Illigor away, so thanks again, and I appreciate everyone watching this. First off, if you're new to Delta Green, welcome. This is a really fun and emotional horror role-playing game, originally based on Call of Cthulhu, but soon it blossomed into its own thing. Your players will be taking the form of agents who are generally government operatives, such as the FBI, CIA, what have you, and they are coalesced into this illegal conspiracy of people within the US government, and this program, like a leech to the US government, siphons off money and cash so that it can stop incursions of the unnatural, all set within the Lovecraft universe. You might be interested in this game if you're a Lovecraft fan, because this does involve lots of things that you're familiar with. If you're familiar with Lovecraft lore, you got Migo, Azathoth, all the good stuff straight from Call of Cthulhu. And B, if you like conspiracy thrillers, because this has a great element of this widening net that your agents just get bits and pieces of as they all form together. And you as the handler get to help weave that intricate web. Everything you need to know to start playing this game is in the aptly named Need to Know guide. This is free online as a PDF. It contains rules and the adventure in the back that I do recommend to start your Delta Green career. It's nice, it's easy, it's short, it's pretty simple. It should teach you and your friends the rules as you go through the game for the first time, and it's legitimately pretty creepy, so I think everyone will really enjoy it. And in this packet, you'll also find some sample characters, so you don't need to worry about your players making agents for the first time, but making agents is pretty fun. And if this is planned to be the beginning of a campaign, I would recommend that your players make their own agents. It's quite simpler than you might expect and pretty quick, despite the character sheet. The way it looks might be a little intimidating at first, but I guarantee you it's easier than you think. And it's a pretty fun collaborative experience to all come together. And this is where Last Things Last succeeds, because this adventure feels very much in that 2.5 hour time slot where your agent, you can take the time at the beginning to explain the rules, help your players make agents, and then go into it without too much complications or too much time. One thing, if your players do take the pre-gen agents, I recommend they take a look at, and you as well, and figure out whether they want to change or not, are these bonds and motivations. Surprisingly, the most useful thing to drive your character long term versus leveling up. You're kind of leveling down all your relationships with these people, and your motivations will get lost over time. But overall, these bonds and these motivations will form your character's arc as you go from mission to mission and interact with these home scenes in between, which home scenes are these narrative-driven play sessions, which you have either after or before a mission. I like to do before a mission, of your players describing their agent's life and generally how it's going downhill and how it's going bad. They have opportunities to do things like go to therapy, funnily enough, practice skills, research more unnatural stuff. It's going to be the real narrative driver of when your agent's going to arc and plummet into the dumpster. And these bonds and motivations are very important for that. So if they don't like them or they don't feel a particular connection, feel free to ask your players to flesh these out or change them how they see fit. Again, they're not bad as written on these sample characters, and they fit pretty well, but just something to keep in mind. This is going to be the main narrative focus of your character. On the blog RPG Logic, which I will link in the description, there's this really great cheat sheet for Delta Green that we enjoyed, certainly at first when we were new players, as it's a front and back of every single rule in the game. So this will be very useful for your players if they're doing it for the first time, but a lot of these rules if you're running this for the first time again, I would keep in mind, you don't need to use all of them. One method I do when I run a system for the first time or when I'm kind of unfamiliar with is I like to have a whiteboard or a notebook paper beside me. And what we do is whenever we run into a rule that we're confused about and I can't fish the answer out in 20 seconds, I write that on the board. I make a snap judgment call of how we did it, and then I move on. And then I know between sessions, my players know, we're all going to sit down and go over all these missed rules and figure out what the correct way to do it was. And it's a way of keeping things flowing in the movement, because Delta Green can kind of be as granular as you want. If you really feel like it, there are rules for pretty much everything. And it's your call whether you want to take the time to stop and look up a rule and be granular about it, which can be fun. I love how much different poisons do is all an exact amount and exact fall damage and stuff like that. There's great rules in there that are really interesting to use and deep dive into. Or you can kind of hand wave and I trust you to make up your own. And again, if you're confused, write it down and come back to it. This isn't a game that's worth, when you're in the middle of a tense moment, stopping to discover the exact specific rule here. And that's going to bring us into Last Things Last. This is a really fun, short, snappy scenario that is surprisingly morose, and it will have your agents picking up after a dead agent. It's a good scenario that my table consistently reflected back to, and your agents might not get it at first, but they will by the end of their first character arc and possibly their campaign or insane character. As at first, you kind of are under the assumption that this is just an agent who lost it, went crazy as his wife passed away, and he attempted to resurrect her with some magic. But as your agents get more and more experience and see more and more horrors and watch those bonds go downhill and everyone leave them, other than maybe that one bond they're just holding to so badly, they're going to understand. And they're going to look back and think, wow, Baugman, maybe you were right. Maybe you messed up in the execution, but I understand why you did it. And that's where the scenario really hits home, that I think might be missed upon your initial reading, that this is a cold, kind of sad scenario describing a potential end for one of your agents that they might see reflected in their own future. So some things to consider before you start this mission. This is kind of a quantum scenario, as in it can really be placed wherever you want it to be in the country, as long as there is an isolated cabin at some end a few hours away. You can really place Baugman and his apartment wherever you want it to be, which is something to think about when you're considering if you want to have a central location for your campaign, which isn't the most important, but just an area for your agents to be around, as a lot of times this has some last minute ring, we need you there agent stuff, and so it can be kind of nice to have your agents nearby so they can always drive versus fly, because there's a whole list of things about bringing your guns on airplanes and stuff, and if they have illegal guns, they can then drive them versus be forced to fly with them and figure that out. So there are definitely some benefits to putting this close to your agents and where you expect your agents to be isolated around. Just something to keep in mind. Another thing it throws at you is the program versus the outlaw schism. So one thing that happens in Last Things Last is it is made to be post 2001. I don't want to deluge this with too much lore, but what you should know is that there used to be one Delta Green, and that split in 2001 into two Delta Greens. One is called the program, one is called Delta Green. They both consider themselves the real Delta Green. The scenario then asks you to make the decision about which group you want your agents to be with, and that's actually a pretty large decision that affects your campaign and everything after this, so it's certainly not something that you should just take lightly. I think you're going to have fun either way. The two vibes I see here is if you're going for the program, your agents have, official government support and are a little more like the classic Scully and Mulder, X-Files, Men in Black kind of vibe, where they definitely seem a little more official and the program can use its government resources and its leverage to help your agents and get your agents into places they wouldn't necessarily be able to get into otherwise. And if you're looking for something like The Outlaws, if you've ever seen the movie The Void, which is this great Lovecraft supernatural movie, the character Vincent does remind me of the classic outlaw. They're a little more scrappy, a little more you're going to meet in a gas station, get handed a wad of hundreds and a file, and said, you need to go stop this problem. You need to do it undercover. And both agencies kind of intertwine sometimes or have conflict. They mostly stay out of each other's way, but that could be a fun thing to implement in your campaign going forward. But regardless, you're going to want to make that decision. And then a lot of the official scenarios are definitely written assuming your agents are the program. So I would probably assume for your first game, you should play as the program and maybe hint at the other side, but you can't really go wrong with either end. It's just going to lead to a different vibe. On page 256 of the Handler's Guide, if you pick that up, you can find all the information you need on the Schism. Again, for your first game, just go with the program, makes it a little bit easier on you, and you can always have a cool defection scene later if you want. This scenario also assumes post-2001. So if you do want to play a pre-2001, pre-Schism game, you're going to want to set this back in the 90s, which again is pretty easy to use. You just have to adjust some of the dates. There's not too much technology that comes into play here that will affect when you set it in. And if you do a pre-90s, there's a bunch of scenarios you can run to show this early Delta Green stuff like PX Poker Night and the like, some of which I have videos on. But just to give you an idea before you run this of how you want to set your campaign both pre or post Schism. And before we go full bore into this, I see this scenario again recommended quite a bit as a good starter scenario, and I completely agree. I also see this need to flesh it out a ton, and I don't really think it needs that as a scenario. There are things that I added which I will talk about and put through the video, but it's really not a scenario that I think you need to make into this huge thing, tons of investigative clues. It works as kind of a quicker sub 3 hour or around that banger where it just teaches your agents and reinforces some central themes going on. I will link this large Google Drive that somebody made showing all of the fan-made resources where you can find tons and tons of stuff. And that is definitely worth sifting through if you find some things that your agents might enjoy, or if you know your player group well and think they're going to appreciate these additions. But aside from some minor changes, you don't need to add a ton to this scenario, again, because it really works as this great introductory one-shot until you get into the real deep investigative ones on the back end. Clyde Baughman has died. He died alone in his apartment, and your agents are brought together to sift through his stuff to see if he left any evidence of the conspiracy that is Delta Green behind, and they have to do it within 48 hours because his family is on the way. This scenario physically in real life took me about 3 hours, I would say, but I added some stuff which I'll go over, and it feels like a really great length for this Delta Green scenario. It's also going to trick you into thinking that other Delta Green scenarios are short, which they are not. This is pretty much the shortest one I've ran, and I thought it worked really well. I'll play it with a group of 4, but this is a scenario I would recommend keeping a low player count for. 5 is going to get real messy, and even 4 felt a little crowded at times. This is certainly just, the program isn't expecting anything weird to be up. They're just sending in some agents to sift through the wreckage, so to speak. So it definitely makes sense for there to be a lower player count. And this is kind of a creepy personal scenario, so I would definitely aim lower. Your players are going to get a handout kind of telling them about the summary of the report on them at the start of this mission. And one thing I also did is I made this a physical handout, and I taped a real key to it. And I do like reinforcing physical keys in my play space, especially with a game with so much locks like Delta Green. It is nice to have a physical key that your agents kind of cash in with you to unlock something or show it and say unlock it. And it's just good to reinforce who has what, and it's not a floating key as in, I think I would have grabbed it. It kind of reinforces keys in physical space. And it's a nice looking little handout. I also sent all my players a fun little coded text to give them the coordinates of where this was happening, and I sent it over their emails, over text, and it was just a fun way to reinforce this opera theming and ways to pull them in unknowingly. So your agents going through this person's apartment will be mostly sifting through a lot of his paperwork. He actually worked as an accountant, so there are quite a bit of paperwork to go through, and this is a good time to show how a lot of Delta Green is clue gathering. This is an investigative game. Yes, there's moments of action and horror and thriller, but a lot of this is good investigative detective work. There are also some complications here to throw in, and I added one as well for myself. You'll have the neighbor, Mrs. Janowitz, who is really good for keeping her agents on their toes and watching their story and making sure they're not exposing themselves. She's not a real threat, but she does say some vaguely creepy stuff that kind of works to up the atmosphere. But her real goal should just be to jump your agents in the hallway and kind of corner them into questions and getting as much information as she can, being nosy. I also added a car outside his vehicle that my agents felt the need to go through. And it's kind of a good practice for A, there are some red herrings in this game, and B, a practice on when they realize very quickly after they start cutting open the seats and ripping everything out that Miss Janowitz is watching them, and they're also in public in a apartment complex. So definitely something to kind of reinforce that theme of secrecy to your agents and the fact that there's going to be eyes on them, and that's not something they want. I also had a physical keyring, as they're going to find Baugsman's key out to the countryside where he has an isolated cabin, very Evil Dead style. And I had a physical key on a keyring with a key for the shed outside, a key for the green box under his bed, and a key for the cabin in general. And I just like that because I let my agents actually physically take the keys off and split them among the players so everyone knew who had a key to what. And just to reiterate about the keys, these are the 3 keys I had, one marked with a box on a green lanyard, one for the car, and one for the cabin. And again, that was for the red herring of the car, but it's good to jangle some physical keys in front of your agents to let them grab and split and see who's going to take what. I also had another key on there, alone and unlabeled. I had this matching to a lock that was on the septic tank later, and my agent, God bless him, could not resist the physical urge to run over and shove a key into a lock and physically watch it pop open at the table. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but that was a really good idea just to have a physical lock because, man, agents love unlocking stuff. But one of the biggest points you want to reinforce in the apartment is just its kind of sad nature. It can kind of slip by you the first time you read this, or even if you run this without thinking of its overall placement in an agent's lifespan, but you should kind of have that sense of loneliness drifting through the apartment. You know, he died on the floor alone after being a part of this conspiracy that he served well for years. And the biggest thing, the closest thing to a funeral the program is going to give him is sending in some random people to dig through his life and make sure he didn't screw up and leave stuff behind. They don't even trust him to clean up after himself, rightfully so. But you should really reinforce that kind of morbid atmosphere of this is what you guys have to look forward to. This is actually a good ending compared to what happens to a lot of agents. But finding the cabin, your players will drive over, and this will be a decently long drive, and that's when I think is a good time to reinforce the bond system, where if, you know, your agent has some kids or a wife or whatever, you can have them call and ask when they're going to be home for dinner, or to reinforce some emotional moment that they're missing by being called up on this last minute mission. I mean, I even like introducing someone's workplace, calling them to ask, hey, are you going to be in tomorrow? Why did you have to leave suddenly? Blah, blah, blah. Give them the grilling. And it's just good to remind them that they are an illegal cover-up conspiracy. And if you have a little bit of time, a little bit extra playtime, that's a good time to implement it. When my agents arrived to the cabin, they split up, which I recommend if you're not used to your party splitting, encourage them to split up here because Delta Green is a game of isolated horror, and you don't need a full team of 4 walk around to every single location if that's your table size. And splitting up definitely helped the narrative here. I had 2 go inside the cabin, and again, because I had the physical keys on a lanyard, they were just easily able to separate them and hand them out. One went to the house and went inside, another went and checked out the shed out back containing the big gallons of gasoline, and I did increase the gallon size of the container, and I actually had a physical container full of water on my table so that when they slid it open, I could just slam it on the table. And you're going to want to practice your sharp cutting if you're new to it, where example, I have the creak of the old door outside containing the gasoline slide open, and I say, they gasp as they see what they see, and then you snap to the group inside and say, you're creeping through this abandoned cabin. You know, it's a little dusty in corners, but there's nothing wrong. Something weird about the plumbing, though, because Baugman, surprise, surprise, has resurrected his wife, and it went horribly wrong. That is not his wife in there, in the undying corpse of his wife. So he, like many of us, have decided to shove her inside the... That is not his wife in there, is where I'm going to leave off. Cut, 3, 2, 1. And so he has decided to shove her inside a septic tank and let her live forever down there, rot away out of sight, out of mind, because he's consumed by this guilt of what he did, but he also can't bring himself to kill the thing that is his wife. So he has this plan set up to burn her alive, which, again, as you're snapping back and forth, your agents will find the cans of gas, investigate, think it's weird. Might notice it's weird that there's an outdoor outhouse. At the same time that your agents both find that it's weird the plumbing inside the house is disconnected, and they could find the green box in the house, which was a great moment of them unlocking it and reading this note. I just rewrote the handout note that it gives. The next page up, this handout B, you can't see in the camera, but I thought this wasn't super legible either, so I just wrote it out in some nicer verbiage. It was a great moment as my players unlocked that green box, opened it up, read the note as my other agent was leaning down, unlocking, snapping open the lock, and opening up the septic tank to investigate what he thought was calling him from inside, and watching my other players' eyes bug out as they realize that this is actually really bad and he should not be in that septic tank. And I had them roll a athletics roll to sprint outside in time and be like, no, shut the tank, which they managed to just do in time. But again, that's not a moment that's a moment that wouldn't be possible if you don't force your players to kind of split up. And force is a strong word. You always suggest or say, hey, do you want to check out this alone? You want to go check out this? You really just want to encourage them splitting up for more tension and ground cover. They don't have all day. And even with that quick glance inside the tank, you kind of want to present her as normal as she can be, as sad and pathetic as she is. She's not going to come out like this with green eyes glowing as though this is clearly evil. The more you play up the moral dilemma that they're kind of in right now, the better the scenario is going to play. And so presenting her right off the bat as really creepy and really evil. And I only had that human score kicked in when he glanced open again and tried to talk to her more and take a closer look at her. He wouldn't just be able to get that from the snap look he got before he closed it. And again, you want to play up this nature. I mean, it's quite sad. Yeah, I know she is basically a demon inside a human body, but the overall situation is pretty tragic, and it legitimately wants out, not just to rule the world or whatever. It just wants to get out of the literal shithole it's been stuck inside for years and years and years. I mean, that would drive anybody crazy. Even a undying evil spirit would think, this sucks. So it's really trying its best to present this nice face, and you want to have your agents kind of argue. And it was a great source of tension when my agents were debating, do we just burn her? I mean, do we finish what he started? Do we just not do that? Is she safe to let out? Is she telling the truth? Is she really an abused wife that was stuck in here? And you really just want to play that up until kind of my agent kind of tried to talk to her solo and kind of had the realization that she's weird and her mouth doesn't match up quite precisely to what she's saying, and she looks kind of like a spring before he slammed it shut, and they had the final confrontation with her, of course. The green box should be another source of tension as your players go through it, and there's nothing quite related to the adventure at hand, so that's something I might change to possibly hint something a little bit more, along with I added some markings around his apartment. I added this cabin floor plan my players could reference, and the sigils carved into his bedroom. If they move the carpet and check, I rewarded their thinking with looking for sigils with finding some. And I also made a videotape, and I know in the writing for the green box it says it's something to do with Yig, which is cool. Yig doesn't really come up in any other scenarios, so I just used black tape to make it FBI only, and I had it be basically a tape showing the resurrection of a corpse, kind of implying where Baugman got this from. And I left the ending of the tape ambiguous to whether the corpse was successful or not, and not hint that it's a demon in there, just that it is a resurrection ritual, which might have worked. So, and something else to keep in mind as you're doing green box stuff is the idea that you want to see the green box for your future campaign, which I will go into more in the last part of this video. I'm not going to rant about it too much now, but just something to keep in mind that this green box is your clues. Do you want to focus on Club Apocalypse? Then put some Club Apocalypse flyers in there. Do you want to focus on Nyarlathotep? Maybe find some Nyarlathotep Steam stuff. Do you want to focus on the schism and the war between the program and the outlaws and include some of that in there? This is just ways to keep your agents interest as they go forward. I included the Knife from the Architect book, which I'll have on screen right now, and you're just going to introduce stuff that your agents are kind of want to investigate in their off time in their home scenes to stay on the case and learn more about some intriguing artifacts. Nothing in here is bad and is definitely workable, but like I also, for his Mac 10, I included a little handout with all of his weapon stats they can do and the addition that is incredibly legal, and they should not want to be caught with this, but it was a good weapon for them to have from mission to mission as they kept in their own green box they set up later. I also have a handout here, a floor plan hinting at Observer Effect, which is another great scenario you can capstone your campaign with, and it's just good to seed these future scenarios through this green box. Editor's note, I also made this big handout for the Shield formula and the Ventago Corporation K group, just a bunch of stuff I made looking spooky, a bunch of papers taped together, a bunch of filler, looks pretty cool. Eventually your agents will come to the crux of this scenario, and that's, what do they do about Marlene, his dead ex-wife? So Marlene, if she does become under attack, she will try to break out and escape, and she's pretty lethal, so she may kill an agent or two, and her goal really is to just get away. She's not here to wreak damage. Her goal is to slash if she needs to and get out. She's been stuck in this literal shithole for years and doesn't feel like doing it any longer. Your agents will kind of, lose control if they just fling open the hatch and give her time to jump out. She has athletics 99, so she should be kind of supernaturally able to spring out, climb on walls, and skitter up in a very scary scene. And your agents need to be prepared to deal with that. It's kind of open, like I said. Your agents can do everything, even from like park a car on top of it, which is a funny suggestion, so that when they open it, there's only a little slit through, so they just kind of maybe find some tubing and shove it down there and burn her with gasoline. Even that, won't kill her. She'll come back after years and years and years, but that's a future agent's problem to deal with, and not your agents. So really, you could set her on fire, and that is quite effective, and that's how they win. Or she can come willingly with them, I've never seen a group do in the play reports, but she can come with them and promise them secrets and magic and stuff, and assumably the program is going to deal with her later, or she's going to look for an opportunity later to burst out and escape anyway after lying to your agents. There's a few ways you could play her, but again, you want to play that friendly old lady, kind of sad old lady stuff at the beginning, and then snap to that Evil Dead kind of rushing out and make her feel desperate and that she's running out of options, which she is. And again, she may kill an agent or two, but if they take, for example, the SMG in Clive Bowman's green box, they could put her down more easily, and you shouldn't worry too much about exact spacing and distances. That should be kind of a desperate struggle to survive. So this main confrontation is going to happen, fight's going to break out, maybe agent dies, maybe agent doesn't, maybe they're going to win, maybe they won't. Like I said, it's a decently hard fight. She is quite mean and nasty and has some good health, and again, you should kind of keep up that sad atmosphere through the whole thing if you can, along with the horror of what's occurring. But regardless, after it's over, agent's going to clean up as best they can. Heck, mine burn down the cabin to try and hide any evidence of them being there, because you got to keep in mind there's bullet holes, maybe shell casings. They need to take their time and clean up after themselves. Do everything they need to do, and then get out and report to their handler. And that's going to be the entirety of the mission. So there's really not a ton here. She can jump body to body if she kills something or if there's a dead body nearby. So I could see her jumping into nature and then maybe having some hunters get in the way of your agents hunting down this deer or whatever you want to do. There's some really interesting stuff you could probably plan out, but that didn't really happen to my table. They just killed her pretty handily after taking some damage, and when she tried to escape and run away to the woods, they burned her alive as they started dumping gasoline on her as she was climbing out, or even through the little slit as she realized what was happening. But it should be a good scary moment, and again, a good way to teach your players all the rules about combat and initiative and lethality. So you finished last things last. Now the question is, where do I go after this? And I have a few suggestions. If you're watching this close to the upload date, it won't be up yet, but if you're from the future, first off, how is it? Is it going pretty good? Secondly, I will have a video going through every single Delta Green book, almost like a buyer's guide, if you're really curious and want to see everything that Delta Green has to offer, whether you should pick it up or not. If you're looking to copy my exact setup, that worked well, but I definitely was learning stuff as I went along and getting deeper into lore. Here is the flowchart for my first campaign. We went Last Things Last, then Victim of the Art, Music from a Darkened Room, Lover on the Ice, Ladybug, Fly Away Home. We did Star Chamber, and then Observer Effect, and then Caligati for the first one, along with in the 90s going PX Poker Night Convergence, and then into God's Teeth. Also included in here some of the factions that I used and when they were discovered in home scene stuff. So I'll post this in the Dropbox, but this is what I did for my first campaign, and I think it worked out pretty well. I also know there's an urge to jump into one of the several large campaigns for Delta Green, and I understand. They look awesome, they're super cool, super in-depth. I wouldn't recommend it though. I really found that by doing a home campaign of all these scenarios mushed together first, really got my confidence and let me know how Delta Green works. That way, when the campaigns can kind of turn it on its head, those moments are appreciated even more. And just good experience is always good experience. But if you're looking to craft your first campaign, I would always recommend picking up the Agent's Handbook. This is going to be all the full rules that you need with all the additional character creation options. Additionally, if you want more player options and your players are nerds and want to pick some weird, obscure US government agency to play as, you can pick up the Complex, which is generally just a bunch of, like I said, US agencies and suggested builds for them, along with some pre-made character sheets in the digital set you'll get with this about making those characters. So pretty helpful if you want expanded character options. But as far as you need just to start the game, you need the Agent's Handbook. Now, the Handler's Guide, which is your side of everything that's going on, is nice, but I wouldn't actually consider it incredibly necessary. It's a good place to reference and check for lore. I mean, most of this is lore and creatures and stuff, but usually every scenario has all the stat blocks you're going to need, along with this only containing additional rules for unnatural stuff and how to cast spells and stuff, which definitely would pick this up at some point along the run. But if you're, again, just looking for the bare minimum, Handler's Guide is a nice treat for the lore heads and for some additional mechanics and stuff, but it's not actually 100% necessary. Now, what I would recommend you do is you should pick up one of the compendium books. These are a book like Night of the Opera, which is my recommendation for beginners, or something like Black Sites, which does contain some good scenarios. And these are going to be a set of scenarios that you can kind of interweave and stick together. And how you're going to stick together those scenarios are going to be in home scenes and something from the Labyrinth. This is a really nice modern day source book for it's 3 friendly factions, everything in Delta Green is friendly with quotation marks, and enemy factions, again with the same quotation marks. And these are really good for just weaving your game together and making it feel like there's a connected meta narrative. For example, I'm a huge fan of the Agent Renko in here. It is a great asset along with some of the other factions. It's just good to include both in your home scenes, and you can kind of stick them into mid-missions, and cannot recommend this enough. It's really well written, it's really fun to read, and has some really cool additional mechanics. So again, I would grab one of the source books, read some scenarios, see what sounds cool. I have videos on quite a bit of scenarios, so feel free to check those out. I'll link them in right now on screen, but you're just going to pick scenarios and make them brick by brick. There is also a few finale scenarios I would recommend. The biggest one I see, which I agree with and was my finale for my first campaign, was Observer Effect, because that feels epic, and it's a tough one to chase that epic high that goes on there. But Ex Oblivione is another one that I see recommended, and now God's Light as well. So there are quite a few good full scenarios to kind of build your way towards, and I would just plan out how you're going to build towards that, again with possibly some home scene interactions, and go through and write down what stage you expect these NPCs' lives to be at and how many you want it to be. I recommend somewhere from 6-ish, 6 to 8-ish is kind of your general campaign run before the agents are either all dead or retired or fully Ship of Theseus away from the initial squad. But again, you're going to want to pick that. And most of these, like I said, are written for the program side of you. So that's why I would recommend starting it. They could be worked on being outlaws without that much difficulty, but just for ease of use, I would go program for your first time. And again, just playing your scenario of being 5 to 6 to 8 scenarios just in a row that have this mixture of labyrinth stuff in between for you to work with. And if you decide to set your game in the 90s, 2 books I would then recommend you pick up are either The Conspiracy or the original Delta Green book. The Conspiracy is kind of a rewrite of a lot of this information, but I actually like the original better. I think it's a little juicier and has some interesting ideas and things that don't quite get translated to this conspiracy book. But by all means, this is not a bad pickup, and this is still an enjoyable book to read if you don't feel like going through all the old mechanics and possibly doing some conversions in your head. But these 2 are recommended for your 90s campaigns. I also would like to recommend 2 fan resources. One are the shotgun scenarios found in the Fairfield Project, and these are a huge compendium of fan-made scenarios that are submitted every year as part of a contest. It's been going on for years and years and years, so you have more than enough stuff to run, along with the winners being quite good. I mean, a lot of scenarios on there are quite good, but especially look at the winners for every year are a good list to pull from, and has some really neat ideas. Some of that is on par or better than a lot of the officially written stuff as well. There's some really, really cool, neat stuff the fan community is working on. And speaking of fan community, there's the fan campaign jams, which I will also link below. And this is a combination of fan wholeheartedly written campaigns and some campaign structure to stick the pre-written scenarios into, which I think is neat. So definitely worth checking out before you embark on your full campaign and spend the whole time looking back saying, wish I could have implemented that, wish I could have implemented that. And it's a good way to, like I said, string together scenarios that makes it feel like a complete total campaign versus just a monster of the week. But that's going to bring us to a close. Like I said, next week I plan to have out a full guide of every single book in Delta Green, like a buyer's guide or a mini review series, so that you can know exactly what you want to pick up and how you want to pick it up. But otherwise, this is going to close us out. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear how your group handled it, how your Last Things Last went, how your full campaign went. I love reading all the comments, so thank you, and all my subscribers, thanks for sticking around. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.